Hi, I'm Bruce Adolphe with episode 2. In the previous episode, we left off where I had turned 7 and had just changed piano teachers. With Eleanor Nelson as my new piano teacher, everything changed quickly. Suddenly, I was playing all the major and minor scales and arpeggios, and soon I was busy memorizing pieces by Mozart, Beethoven, Debussy, Scriabin, Ravel, Gershwin, Prokofiev, and Rachmaninoff, and of course, Bach Preludes and Fugues, as well as quirky works by Cherubinin and Rossley Finney. She taught me the fundamentals of harmony and also concepts of form with each piece. Plus, I was still improvising, often making up my own versions of the pieces I was supposed to practice, and she would listen to those improvisations. She never critiqued them, but said things like, "Wow, and now let's hear the Beethoven." I remember she urged me not to improvise while playing Beethoven sonatas, which was probably a good idea, or at least it was good that I should know how to play them without adding my own ideas in case I were to become a pianist instead of a composer. When Eleanor asked all her piano students to prepare a Bach prelude and fugue and something else for her annual musicale, I felt strongly that I should compose a piece for my something else. So, for my first musicale, I composed a moody little piece in minor that was appropriately dark and serious, but also delicate and not too hard, so that I could be as emotional as possible during the performance. Playing my piece from memory was a funny idea for me because of the process of composing it. First, I improvised until I felt I had several versions of a possible piece, about 3 minutes long. Then I memorized the version I liked best. Then I wrote it down so I could bring it to my lesson. So actually, I had memorized it before it was officially a piece on paper. Once it was on paper, I did refer to the page as if it had some authority over what I would play in the concert. And very soon, I needed that page to remember the piece. The idea of being faithful to the printed page when it was my own formerly improvised music was a new way for me to think about composing. The day of the performance came, and my father accompanied me to Mrs. Nelson's house for the occasion. They were perhaps 10 very young piano students sitting on folding chairs next to their parents. Girls in party dresses, white socks and black shoes, and boys in crisp suits with clip-on ties. We were permitted to play on the grand piano rather than the upright for this particular event. Mrs. Nelson had printed programs for the concert, which in those days meant actual carbon copies. I looked at the names of the composers on the program: Bach, Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, Mendelssohn, Debussy, and Adolphe. Wow! Expresses it perfectly. As time went on, I became used to seeing the name Adolphe on programs. I began to notice that the convention of putting a composer's dates in parentheses after the name, such as Johann Sebastian Bach, 1685-1750, was a constant reminder of death. To make matters worse, some programs simply left the second date open when a composer is still alive, such as Bruce Adolphe, 1955-blank. That, it must be said, is creepy. Preferable is the other convention, such as Bruce Adolphe, born 1955. That's okay. In any case, the very first program simply said Adolphe, no dates, and no first name. Each pianist played their Bach prelude and fugue, or in some cases just a prelude, and then after others had played Bach, they returned to perform their second selection. When my turn came to play my own piece, I leapt up to the piano and felt like I was both at the piano and also hovering above myself like a cameraman filming a movie. It seemed like the piece was only seconds long. The applause started and I bowed, but then something bizarre happened. My father stood up and took a bow as if he were the composer. The applause increased for him, and then, just as I was about to yell out that I was the composer, my father smiled and pointed to me and said, "Bruce wrote the piece himself." Then the applause seemed to grow still louder, and I felt dizzy with happiness. After the concert, there was lemonade and cookies, and I asked my father why he had stood up for the piece. He put his hand on my shoulder warmly and said, "I wanted them to think that an adult had written the piece for a moment, and then find out it was by you. That made them realize just how excellent a piece it really is." Well, my father had a wild theatrical streak in him, but it was more than that. This was not theater. This was real life. I think the reason he could spontaneously find the nerve to temporarily fool a room full of kids and their parents, while simultaneously risking offending his son, even for a moment, was that he had grown up defying convention as a way of life. The son of an Orthodox rabbi in a religious Brooklyn neighborhood, my father was the first person in his community to read secular books and go on to study secular subjects in college. I think that he was always ready to play games with people's conventional expectations and to challenge the validity of formal situations. Also, he was good at reading an audience and probably could predict how they would react. In the case of the mysterious composer named Adolphe, he was absolutely right. I was elated that the audience had thought my piece had been composed by a grown-up. It encouraged me much more than if the applause had been polite and perhaps a touch patronizing for the cute 7-year-old who had written himself a little piece. I held on to that feeling that my music was like grown-ups' music throughout my childhood. My father died when I was 12. I never got to discuss anything with him from more than my child's point of view. I would never know what he thought of my composing or my increasingly serious musical aspirations, but intuitively, I felt his supportive, even inspiring presence. He was a dancer, a natural actor and comedian with an appealing light baritone singing voice, a fervent and knowledgeable Shakespeare enthusiast, a natural teacher, and a passionate defender of civil rights. He and my mother, who died when I was 19, are in most of my dreams to this day, and most of those dreams take place in the house in which my brother John and I grew up. For me, the piano was the center of the household. Playing the piano was how I defined myself, and improvising held the key to my happiness. When I improvise now, as I do every day, I can feel my father's presence as the act of improvisation summons memories and feelings from my childhood, making it vividly real that, as T.S. Eliot said, all is always now. To be continued.